We are going to talk about actual listing documents now. This portion will be about seller representation agreements, and then next up, we'll talk about buyer representation agreements. Seller representation agreements, you've got four basic categories. Now, these are types of contracts. So when we get into the contract section, we'll talk about how these actually work and what makes them valid. But this is just for agency purposes, the types of contracts that we use when representing sellers. There's four basic types: an exclusive right to sell, an exclusive agency, an open listing, and a net listing. The first one is an exclusive right to sell. And my bet for your career is this will be the one that you use the most. An exclusive right to sell contract means the seller hires only one broker to represent them, and no matter who brings the buyer, the seller or the broker gets paid. What this means is if during your listing period, let's say January 1st to June 30th, at some point the seller comes to you and says, "Good news, Amy, I found a buyer. My cube mate, their daughter wants to buy my house." Yoo-hoo! That means you're involved in the process, right? They can't just hijack you and go find their own client. And the reason that most agents choose this is you don't want to spend all of your time, talent, and marketing resources on a property that you're not going to have an opportunity to sell. Because as a reminder, when do you get paid as an agent in the transaction? You get paid at closing, which means there's going to be oftentimes that you put a little risk up front, investing some of your marketing dollars, and you don't want to waste those on a seller that's just going to go off and find their own opportunity and leave you at a deficit for taking that listing because you never had a closing. Okay. This type of listing agreement is very common amongst full service brokers who, again, are a part of a multiple listing service through a local board of realtors. Next up is an exclusive agency. And this is an agreement where the seller still only hires one agent, but they do retain the right to sell it themselves. And then whoever is the procuring cause, the broker or the seller, if it's the broker, then they earn the commission. There are a few of these brokerages in Iowa. In our MLS, I know through the Des Moines Area Association of Realtors, we call them a FSBO A. And oftentimes when you show the property as a real estate agent, it will have the listing broker sign in the yard plus a for sale by owner sign. That's what we call a FSBO, FSBO. And whoever's the procuring cause, if that listing agent attracts a buyer through the multiple listing service, then we earn commissions. But if the seller finds that cube mate with a daughter that wants to buy the house, then they could proceed without their agent and not owe any commission dollars. I think some brokers that charge like a flat fee commission might use this type of structure. An open listing is a listing where the seller can hire multiple real estate agents, but they still retain the right to sell it on their own. And the party that's the procuring cause, the broker that's the procuring cause, is the one that gets paid. But again, the seller still retains the right to sell it on their own. Why would you use this type of listing agreement, right? Well, believe it or not, we used to sell real estate before the internet. Back in the day, even when we had real estate associations, like your local board that I've been speaking of, the Des Moines Area Association of Realtors, for example, before all of, even when that was a thing, but before the internet, our best way of communicating listings to each other was to have a book printed every week that this local board of realtors delivered to every brokerage in town. It was very antiquated. And before some of these boards were created, the best way for a seller to let everyone know that their house was for sale, was to call every broker in town. That was their marketing plan. Now, obviously, we've come a long way, baby, right? And we've gone from that book of sharing information with realtor members of a board. Then we moved on to having a floppy disk, or what it was called, a program that was downloaded on a broker's computer. And now everything is streamed online. You'll have access to a website that you can go in with your own login information and navigate available properties and other data and content about listings through that local board of realtors that you might be joining a membership to. Not all of you are going to be a member of a local board or the National Association of Realtors. That's fine. I would say in Iowa, I would guess about 20% of our agents are not a member. Typically, those are agents in maybe property management, commercial real estate, ag, or industrial real estate. That might be an opportunity in a community where maybe you list a property with a broker in your town, but you also think that a buyer might come from a neighboring community. So you also list the property with one of those brokerages. That's your way of getting the word out. Now, this is rumor, but I've heard that places like New York City and Maui do not have a multiple listing service. They do not share commissions, and they do not cooperate with outside brokerages from their own. And that's their business platform for whatever reason. I don't know a lot more about that than to just share that rumor with you. But that's just let you know that maybe not everyone has a cooperating system like we do here in Iowa for these local boards. Last but not least is a net listing. And a net listing occurs when a seller comes to you and says, Amy, I just want to net $150,000 for the house. It's $150,000. Then I go off and I list it for $200,000. I keep the $50,000 for commissions and give them their $150,000. Kind of sounds fun, but the reality is in Iowa, those are illegal. Excuse me, and here's why. It's because it doesn't protect the public. And the Real Estate Commission of Iowa, the Iowa Real Estate Commission, we're all about protecting the public, which means that we feel that to protect the public, they have a right to know what the property was listed for, list price, and the commissions they're being charged. So this is an illegal practice in Iowa. Now, one thing I want you to glean from this that could come on the exam is if you know or have reason to know that a seller has an unexpired contract, an unexpired listing contract with an agent, when can you approach them or solicit them for their business? Let's say, for example, your neighbor lists their house with you. How dare they, right? And you keep seeing that sign 1 month, 2 months, 3 months goes by. Like, why didn't they list with me? I would have had that sold by now. I should tell them that they made a mistake. They should hire me. Can you do that? The answer is no. The only time that you can approach anyone with an exclusive type contract, when you know that they're still under contract with another agent, they must approach you first. Otherwise, you've got to wait till that listing expires before you can go over and talk and knock on that neighbor's door and ask, can I now help you get this property sold? Now, those expiration dates, again, if you're a member of a local board of realtors, that information will be on this multiple listing service platform. But otherwise, the question is, if you know someone has an unexpired exclusive agency agreement, whether it's for agency or a listing agreement, when can you approach them? The answer is they've got to approach you first, or you wait until the contract expires. So anytime you see the word exclusive, that rule applies. An open listing, though, is different because they hire multiple agents. So if you know of a situation where a seller has an open listing, you're free to approach them. And again, I don't know that this is going to be a very common type of listing for you, but it is one that might still be out there depending on the community that you're in. So those are the 4 types of listing agreements. I would absolutely know those for the exam. And then again, know when you can approach them if they've got an unexpired exclusive agreement, either type of exclusive agreement. Here's kind of a general information list that's needed for a listing agreement, but I did want to show you a generic contract. This is one that's used with the Des Moines Area Association of Realtors and provided through a program through the Iowa Association of Realtors called Form Simplicity. But as you see, it goes through the local address, which would be their street address, 123 Banana Street. The legal description, which would be the Lot 7 Plat 4 Indian Hills Estates. Okay, make sure that you write out the entire legal description on your listing agreements and on a purchase agreement. Don't just write per assessor's page or something short. If you run out of room on these 2 lines, I would say get an attachment to your contracts and have the entire thing written out. And that could be a good test question for you as well. We're obviously talking about disclosing the list price, your commissions. Reserved items would be anything that is a fixture, personal property that became attached and is now real estate. Maybe a chandelier that's a family heirloom would normally be considered a fixture and stay with the property, but your sellers want to keep it because it's been in the family for 100 years. You would write that here, but you would also need it in the purchase agreement for the buyer to sign. Remember, this is an agreement between the seller and the broker. A purchase agreement that we talk about here in the upcoming sections is going to be a contract between a buyer and a seller, or a lender and a landlord and a tenant in a lease. But this is between broker and seller. So this is a place for you to remember that it needs to go on an actual purchase agreement or sales contract. This talks about when the agreement ends. You've got some marketing language that will be in there. This will talk about non-discrimination, which is addressing fair housing. What happens if they breach this contract, which basically means if they list the property for $300,000 and you bring them a $300,000 cash offer and they say, no, we want $310,000 now. They've breached this contract and would still technically owe to pay a commission in full. Okay. And then the last thing here, this talks about that material defect or a material adverse fact, letting them know that anything that would be significant change in value, structure, or environmental. The example that we used in the last video, I believe, was about water in the basement. That's letting the sellers know that they've got to disclose that no matter what. That doesn't remain confidential. It's got to be acknowledged to everyone. Okay. Up next is buyer representation. We'll go through that quickly on how the contract looks on the buyer side.